Callan Verity always said he never wanted to teach gym class. Yet here he was, on a tram heading to the Intergalactic Sports Academy in the subterranean city of Asterope. The tram wasn't the worst place he'd been, but it was close, all metal and plastic, like the inside of a sardine can, if sardines had to commute. Around him, passengers pretended that standing inches from each other wasn't awful. Callan eyed the exit, considering whether jumping out mid-tunnel might not be preferable. Asterope was a city for people who liked the sun but weren't keen on seeing it. Humanity's proudest boast, they said, like shouting into a pit and congratulating yourself when the echo bounced back. He was here to teach sports, of all things, to alien students who probably thought humans were only good for being squishy and complaining. Which, let's face it, wasn't entirely wrong. The tram shuddered to a halt, and Callan stumbled out, greeted by the stale, recycled air of the underground expanse. He looked up at the dome ceiling, painted with a view of the sky that was almost convincing, except for the occasional flicker when the projectors had a bad day. Asterope, where the sun never shines and the spirits don't either, he muttered to himself, adjusting the strap of his worn satchel. Making his way through the crowd, Callan wondered what fresh hell awaited him at the academy. The place was a prestigious institution, a beacon of intergalactic cooperation through competition, they claimed, which was a fancy way of saying they threw everyone into a pit, yelled fight, and hoped nobody got too bruised. The academy was a sprawling mass of building blocks assembled by someone with a vendetta against aesthetics. Callan approached the main entrance, a massive arch that looked like it could swallow him whole, and he couldn't help but think it was just about hungry enough to try. "Welcome to the Intergalactic Sports Academy," said a voice to his left. Callan turned to find Elda, the academy's holographic receptionist, shimmering into appearance. Her digital smile was as warm as a freezer and about as sincere. "Ah, Elda. Nice to see they haven't replaced you with something less irritating," Callan said, trying to match her synthetic cheer. "Not for lack of trying," Elda replied, her voice dripping with digital venom wrapped in a sweet coating. She gestured with a flicker of pixels. "Right this way. Orientation is about to begin." Callan followed the hologram through the labyrinth of corridors, past students of every shape and size. He couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of his situation, tasked with teaching sports to beings who could, quite literally, run circles around him. The orientation hall was packed with a varied collection of alien life forms, their chatter filling the air like an orchestra of chaotic noise. "Welcome, everyone," boomed a voice from the stage, silencing the crowd. It was Trux, the academy's head coach, a giant of a being with the body of a bear and the disposition of a rattlesnake with a toothache. "Here at the academy, we believe in the spirit of competition," Trux continued, his voice a rumble that could crumble buildings. "And by spirit, I mean we're gonna beat that into you until you win or break." Callan couldn't help but smirk. He liked Trux already in a thank God I'm not you kind of way. "You, the humans, will bring your unique perspective to our games," Trux said, his eyes fixing on Callan as if daring him to contribute anything unique. "And remember, no pressure. But if you fail, it'll mean the end of your kind's involvement in this tournament." "No pressure at all," Callan muttered under his breath. The orientation droned on, detailing the academy's rules and the upcoming tournament. Callan's eyes glazed over as Elda outlined the oppressive regulations enforced by the Tournament Council. The council seemed to have one rule for everything, and none of them sounded fun. No unauthorized equipment, no unsanctioned training, and sure as hell, no thinking outside the box. "They love their rules," said a voice beside him. Callan turned to see a fellow human, a wiry guy with a mop of unruly hair and a badge that read Lance. "Rules keep us from having too much fun," Callan replied, offering a grin. Lance nodded. "Or any fun, really. You here for the teaching gig," Callan shrugged. "Someone's got to teach these kids what not to do. Yeah, good luck with that. These aliens are more about survival of the fittest." "And the fittest is rarely human," Lance said. Callan raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a challenge. You could say that, Lance replied. Or suicide. But hey, who am I to judge? As the orientation wrapped up, Callan made his way to his assigned quarters. It was a generous description for a room that looked like a prison cell with slightly more natural light, if you could call electric bulbs natural. Sitting on the edge of the uncomfortable bed, Callan mulled over his new role. The Intergalactic Sports Academy, home to the galaxy's future champions, and now his home too. A place where the rules made as much sense as trying to knit with spaghetti. Hell of a first day, he muttered, staring at the ceiling. Callan was pulled from his thoughts by a knock at the door. He opened it to find Trucks looming in the corridor, his frame barely fitting in the human-sized passage. "Verity," Trucks growled. "Got a minute?" Callan gestured him in with a resigned sigh. "Sure, plenty of those to spare. What's up?" Trucks ducked through the doorway, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Heard you've been asking questions about the tournament rules." "You say questions, I say expressing a healthy skepticism," Callan replied, arms crossed. Trucks's laugh was a deep rumble like an impending avalanche. "Skepticism gets you respect around here or a quick trip out the airlock. Depends on the day." "Good to know," Callan said, nodding slowly. "But seriously, don't these rules seem a bit much?" Trucks's face hardened, a bear who'd lost his last jar of honey. "The council likes control, makes them feel like gods. And we're the ants, or the squishy things ants step on." Callan chuckled, though it was more out of discomfort than humor. "Well, I'm here to teach games, not play them. Just watch your step, human," Trucks said, a hint of genuine concern in his growl. "This place eats people like you for breakfast." Callan gave a mock salute. "Noted. I'll try to be indigestible." Trucks left with a nod, and Callan sat back down, staring at the ceiling once more. This was going to be an interesting ride, he mused, if by interesting you meant potentially lethal. But hey, everyone needed a little excitement in life. And if that excitement came with a side of alien sportsmanship and a dash of existential dread, who was he to complain? He was just a teacher, after all. The next day dawned, or rather, the artificial lights switched to morning mode, with all the enthusiasm of a Monday. Callan dragged himself out of bed, wondering if coffee existed in this underground nightmare of a city. The academy halls were already bustling by the time he arrived. Students were preparing for their morning classes, their chatter a chaotic mix of alien languages and the occasional human curse thrown in for good measure. Callan's first class was a mixed group, humans, aliens, and one creature that looked like it had been put together from spare parts by a drunk engineer. They eyed him with varying degrees of suspicion and boredom. "All right, folks," Callan began, clapping his hands together. "I'm Callan Verity, your new sports instructor. Before we get to the sports part, let's cover the basics. Don't die, don't kill anyone, and if you can't manage that, at least make it look like an accident." A few snickers echoed around the room, and Callan knew he'd at least won over the ones who understood sarcasm. "Any questions?" A tall, spindly alien with a face like a melted candle raised a tentacle. "Are the rumors true that humans are fragile and break easily?" Callan grinned. "Only on Tuesdays," the class chuckled, a mix of clicks, grunts, and the occasional human giggle. "Good start." As he began the lesson, demonstrating basic exercises that wouldn't land anyone in the infirmary, Callan kept one eye on the students, the other on the clock. He had a feeling that the academy's oppressive rules were going to make this job more challenging than wrangling a herd of cats on a sugar high. But for the moment, he was the teacher. And as any decent teacher knows, sometimes you just have to fake it until you make it, or at least until you can make a run for it. At the end of the day, as Callan headed back to his quarters, he passed by the academy's main notice board. A new announcement had been posted, a reminder about the upcoming tournament and the importance of following the rules. He paused for a moment, reading the bold letters with a growing sense of impending doom. "Mandatory compliance or face the consequences," it read. Callan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Welcome to Asterope," he muttered. Where the games are deadly and the rules are deadlier. He turned away, already thinking of ways to survive this madness. Whatever the tournament had in store, he knew one thing for sure. It was going to be one hell of a ride. And with that cheerful thought, he headed back to his room, contemplating whether it was too late to make a career change to something less dangerous, like bomb disposal. Callan Verity stood before his new class of alien students, each one a vibrant mix of colors, appendages, and smells that would make a trash compactor blush. He was armed with nothing more than a whistle and a level of sarcasm that could cut through titanium. "All right, listen up," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the metallic walls of the sports hall. "I'm Callan Verity, your guide in this delightful institution. Think of me as more of a referee than a coach. I won't stop you from breaking the rules as long as you can convincingly blame someone else." A collective murmur rose from the group, half of which probably didn't understand a word he said. Callan continued, pointing to the holo display behind him. "Today's lesson is about strategy, or as I like to call it, how to survive without getting vaporized." Questions. A tentacle shot up from somewhere in the back. "What is vaporized?" the alien asked, its voice like nails on a chalkboard, only less musical. "Great question," Callan replied, his lips curling into a grin. "Vaporized is what happens when you try to win without thinking. Trust me, it's overrated." Another alien, a bulbous creature with eyes scattered around its body, chimed in. "But we're taught to follow the rules, of course." "You are," Callan said, with the kind of sincerity usually reserved for used car salesmen. "But the rules are like a speed limit. Suggestions, really. Now let's move on to a little exercise I like to call dodge the bureaucracy." He motioned for the students to form a circle, a task that took longer than expected given the assortment of limbs and body parts involved. Once they were settled, Callan laid out the plan. "Here's how it works. We split into teams. One team plays the council and the other plays the rest of us poor sods. The council team enforces the rules while everyone else tries to, and I can't stress this enough, creatively interpret them." Snickers erupted from the crowd, and Callan knew he had them. "All right, council team, you stand over there. Everyone else spread out. Remember, think outside the planet and don't get caught." As the students began the exercise, Callan watched with a mix of amusement and dread. The council team, in their best impression of authority, shouted commands and waved fake rulebooks. The others, however, were surprisingly adept at bending the rules without outright breaking them. It was like watching a ballet where everyone occasionally forgot their lines and swung a punch instead. One of the humans, a wiry girl named Bev, managed to sneak past the council team undetected, her movements quick and precise. Callan caught her eye and gave a nod of approval. "See, that's what I'm talking about." Meanwhile, the council, or at least one of their many eyes, was watching too. A group of their representatives had gathered in the observation booth, their expressions hidden behind reflective visors that screamed tax auditor. Callan had half a mind to wave and offer a free pass to the restroom. After the chaos settled and most of the students had either broken a sweat or a limb, Callan called them back in, clapping his hands to get their attention. "Good work, team. Remember, in a real tournament, creativity could be the difference between winner and new crater on the surface." A couple of aliens nodded, their enthusiasm dampened by the prospect of cratering. Bev approached Callan, a confident grin on her face. "That was fun. So, what's next?" "Learning how to build a ship out of duct tape and bad ideas," Callan chuckled. "That's next week's lesson. Today we're sticking with sports that don't involve imminent death." The rest of the session passed with more exercises designed to promote creative strategies. Callan knew he was stirring the pot, but he figured a little spice wouldn't kill anyone, unless the council decided to turn up the heat. As the students filed out, Callan was left to pack up, collecting stray equipment and pondering the wisdom of his approach. He was interrupted by the arrival of Elda, the Academy's ever-present and ever-irritating holographic guide. "Impressive tactics, Mr. Verity," she said, her synthetic voice as syrupy as ever. "I'm sure the council was fascinated by your methods." Callan didn't bother hiding his smirk. Fascinated, huh? I'll take that as a win. An interesting choice of words, Elder replied. They might prefer reckless. Reckless keeps things interesting, he said, slinging the last of the gear over his shoulder. And besides, these students need to learn how to think on their feet, or tentacles, or whatever. Elda's image flickered, her digital form adjusting like she was bracing for impact. It seems the council has requested a meeting with you. Callan paused, a sense of impending doom settling over him like a lead blanket. Ah, the old request that's really more of a "we'll pay you a visit with an airlock demonstration" kind of thing. You could say that, Elda replied, her expression unreadable as only a hologram's could be. You're expected at noon. Expected, Callan muttered. In the same way, a walking stake is expected by a pack of hungry wolves. Elda merely smiled, a gesture that might have been comforting if not for the undertone of good luck not getting yourself killed. As the clock ticked closer to noon, Callan found himself pacing the corridors of the academy, his mind racing through potential defenses for his teaching style. Unorthodox was a word he liked, though he doubted the council would find it comforting. The council chamber was a large, imposing room designed to make its occupants feel small and insignificant. A long table stretched across its center, occupied by a collection of beings whose expressions ranged from disinterested to openly hostile. Callan Verity, boomed a voice from the head of the table. It belonged to a being whose species Callan couldn't quite place, probably something dredged up from the galaxy's darker corners. You've been summoned to explain your teaching methods. Callan made his way to the podium, his every step echoing in the cavernous room. Summoned. Such a friendly word. I'm glad we're all on the same page. The council members exchanged glances, their confusion palpable. Sarcasm, it seemed, wasn't a universal language. Your methods are unconventional, the leader continued, his voice a low rumble. You encourage rule bending and chaos. I prefer to call it problem solving, Callan replied, his tone as level as he could manage. In a tournament setting, flexibility can be the key to victory, or to disaster, another council member interjected, his voice sharp and cutting. Hard to have one without the other, Callan shot back. But look, I'm not here to teach them how to cheat. I'm here to show them that sometimes the rules are just the starting point. The room fell silent, the council members digesting his words like a questionable meal. And what ensures they'll apply these methods appropriately? Asked another member, her voice silky with distrust. Callan shrugged. That's where actual character comes in. You know, the bit you can't program or legislate. There was a pause, filled with the kind of tension you'd expect right before a bar brawl, complete with the shattered glass, minus the actual beer. Finally, the leader spoke again. We will monitor your classes, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. To ensure your teachings align with academy standards. Callan nodded, his mind already racing with ways to continue pushing the envelope without pushing himself out an airlock. Sounds fair, he said, lying through his teeth. I'll make sure to color within the lines, at least occasionally. The meeting adjourned with the same enthusiasm one might associate with a root canal. Callan left the chamber, his mind buzzing with possibilities, and a fair amount of dread. Back in his quarters, Callan flopped onto his bed, staring at the ceiling with a mixture of frustration and resolve. The council would be watching, and he'd have to find a way to teach his students without drawing too much ire from the powers that be. Just another day at the office, he muttered to himself, the words more of a mantra than anything else. As the artificial lights dimmed for the night, Callan let his mind wander through potential lesson plans and strategies. He knew he was walking a fine line, but he'd never been one to shy away from a challenge, especially one that involved a little creative anarchy. With a final sigh, he rolled over, pulling the coarse blanket over himself and surrendering to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and, if he was lucky, a chance to push the boundaries even further. He drifted off with a smirk on his face and a plan forming in his mind. If the council wanted to play hardball, Then Callan Verity was more than ready to swing for the fences. Callan was back in the sports hall, surrounded once again by a rainbow explosion of aliens, from the bulbous to the tentacled. They were all buzzing with an energy he hadn't seen before, like caffeinated squirts or politicians with a new scandal. He liked it. So he started, casually leaning against the holo display. I hear some of you have been trying out the old bend-it-like bureaucracy technique. How's that going for you? Mosca, the inquisitive alien with more colors than a bad drug trip, raised a tentacle. We tried it during last night's match, Mosca said, their voice a curious blend of clicks and hums. We won, Callan grinned. Of course you did. What you do bribe the ref, not exactly, Mosca replied, a mischievous glint in their many eyes. We interpreted out of bounds to mean temporarily displaced. Chuckles ran through the group and Callan nodded approvingly. Now that's the spirit. Just make sure your creative interpretations don't get you vaporized. Bev chimed in, her eyes alight with mischief. Speak for yourself, Callan. I'm aiming to be a crater with style, a tag girl. Style's important. Nobody remembers the guy who died boring. Things had been going well. The students were catching on to the idea that rules were more like distant cousins at a family reunion, best acknowledged but easily ignored. But it wasn't all rainbows and victories. The council had decided to step up their vigilance, installing surveillance drones that buzzed around like mechanical gnats with a vendetta. Callan could practically hear their tiny, judgmental whirring. All right, today we're going to tweak a game called Comet Crash. The goal is simple. Don't get hit. Callan gestured at the setup with a sweeping motion, indicating a series of obstacles and launchers. He felt a bit like a circus ringmaster showing off the lions. If that's simple, I'd hate to see what you call complicated, grumbled one of the new aliens, a spiky creature who looked like an irritable hedgehog. Complicated is trying to explain the concept of sarcasm to a council member, Callan shot back. Now form your teams and remember, think fast, dodge faster. The group split up, and soon the air was filled with the flurry of limbs, appendages, and no small amount of shouting. It was a scene of chaotic beauty, like a ballet choreographed by an angry toddler. Mosca's team was doing well, weaving through the course with an impressive blend of agility and improvisation. Callan watched as they used their surroundings creatively, vaulting over barricades, and at one point, swinging off of an overhead beam like a neon monkey. Bev's team, on the other hand, was demonstrating a more direct approach. Kid gloves were off, and she was playing like there was more than just a win at stake. Nice moves, Bev, Callan called as she narrowly avoided a foam projectile. If you dodge the council like that, you might just survive this year. Survival's overrated. I'm shooting for legendary, Bev shot back, her voice a mixture of breathlessness and exhilaration. The session continued, filled with near misses and unexpected victories. Callan found himself laughing more than he had in years. There was something intoxicating about watching these students push boundaries and find their own way to win. Of course, the ever-watchful eyes of the council drones were present, silently judging from above. They hovered like mechanical specters, capturing every move, every creative violation of a rule. Callan could almost hear the bureaucratic tutting. As the session wound down, he gathered the students together like a shepherd herding particularly unruly sheep. Good work today. Remember, creativity and chaos are your friends. Just don't let them stab you in the back. The students began to disperse, and Callan could feel the tension in his shoulders easing. Mosca lingered behind, their expression curious. Why do you teach us this way? The alien asked, genuine interest in their voice. Because if you don't learn to think for yourself, someone else will do the thinking for you, and trust me, you don't want that someone to be the council. Mosca nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I believe you, Callan. With a final nod, Mosca left, trailing behind the rest of the class. Callan stood alone in the sports hall, the echoes of laughter and shouts still bouncing off the metallic walls. But the moment of peace was short-lived. Elda's holographic form flickered into existence beside him, her smile as disingenuous as ever. "The Council's surveillance has increased," she said, her voice laced with artificial cheer. "Yeah, I noticed. Hard to ignore when you've got robots buzzing around like disgruntled hornets. They're concerned about the methods you're using," Elda continued, unperturbed by his sarcasm. "There's talk of further measures, figures. Can't have a bit of fun without the fun police rolling up, can we?" Elda's expression remained unchanged, but Callan could have sworn he detected a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "You might want to consider finding middle ground." "Middle ground?" Callan echoed, incredulous. "The only thing in the middle around here is me, trying not to get crushed between a rock and a dozen hard places." Elda didn't reply, merely flickered out of existence like a bad dream finally ending. Callan sighed, running a hand through his hair. The Council wanted him to play by their rules, or at least pretend to. He'd have to be more careful, more strategic. But even as he considered the challenge ahead, he felt a spark of defiance. The next day, Callan returned to the sports hall, a new plan brewing in his mind. It was risky, but then again, everything worth doing usually was. He rounded up the students who were already buzzing with anticipation, eager for whatever challenge he'd throw at them. "All right, listen up," he called, his voice cutting through the chatter. "New day, new game. This one's called Black Hole Poker. It's all about reading your opponents and knowing when to bluff. Poker. Isn't that a bit sedate?" Bev asked, arching an eyebrow. "Sure, if you're playing with cards, but we're not. We're playing with strategy and a little bit of chaos." The students looked intrigued, and Callan took that as a good sign. He explained the rules, or lack thereof, and watched as their expressions shifted from confusion to understanding. "Remember, the key is unpredictability," Callan said, eyes scanning the group. "If they don't know what you're going to do, they can't stop you." The game began, and once again, the hall erupted into a whirlwind of activity. Bev's team was quick to employ deception, setting false trails and misleading signals. Mosca's team countered with unpredictability, making moves that defied logic and threw their opponents off balance. Callan watched with a mix of pride and trepidation. The students were coming into their own, shedding the rigid constraints imposed by the academy and embracing the chaos. But with every victory, he felt the shadow of the council looming larger. It didn't take long for the drones to make their presence felt. They zipped around, capturing footage that would no doubt be scrutinized by the council with all the joy of a tax audit. Callan felt a pang of unease, knowing full well that the surveillance was both a threat and a challenge. The session ended with another win for Mosca's team. The students were high on adrenaline and camaraderie, exchanging high fives and congratulations. Callan joined in, his laughter genuine but tinged with an undercurrent of anxiety. As the students filed out, Callan lingered, watching the empty hall with a sense of foreboding. The council was tightening its grip, and he'd be lying if he said he wasn't worried. But even as the worry gnawed at him, he couldn't shake the determination that had taken root. He'd started something here, something important. And no amount of council meddling was going to squash it. The door creaked open and Elda flickered back into view. "Another successful session, I see. Depends on your definition," Callan replied, crossing his arms. "The kids are learning, adapting. That's success in my book. The council may not see it that way," Elda cautioned, her tone as neutral as ever. "They never do," Callan muttered, more to himself than to her. "But they can't stop me from teaching them how to think. Not unless they plan on lobotomizing the whole class. The thought has crossed their minds," Elda said, a touch too flippantly for Callan's taste. He gave her a sharp look, but it just bounced off her holographic armor. "I'll keep on doing what I'm doing. They can watch all they want. As long as the kids learn to stand on their own feet, it's worth it." Elda's form flickered as if processing his words. "I'll relay that to the council." "Yeah, do that," Callan said, his voice laced with defiance. "Maybe it'll give them something to think about." As Elda disappeared, Callan returned to his thoughts, planning the next session, the next challenge. He needed to stay one step ahead to keep the students evolving, growing. He knew the council would continue to tighten their noose, but he was ready to dance on the edge, to push the boundaries just enough to stay ahead. The students were counting on him, and failure wasn't an option. With renewed determination, Callan headed back to his quarters, plans forming in his mind like storm clouds on the horizon. The only way forward was to keep pushing, keep challenging, and to hope that in the end, the students would be ready to face whatever lay beyond the academy's walls. And if the council wanted to play hardball, well, Callan Verity was more than ready to step up to the plate. The morning air in Asterope was as fresh as recycled oxygen could be, meaning it had the aftertaste of stale socks. Callan Verity strode into the sports hall, the place already buzzing with the sort of energy you'd find in a room full of caffeinated toddlers. Well, caffeinated toddlers with extra limbs and varying degrees of bioluminescence. All right, space cadets, gather round. Callan's voice echoed off the metallic walls, bouncing around like a pinball in a machine that hadn't seen maintenance in a decade. The students formed a loose semicircle, their colorful forms like an intergalactic fruit salad. Mosca's appendages were already twitching with anticipation, and Bev was wearing that smirk she always did before someone, usually Callan, got into trouble. So, the big tournament's creeping up faster than a council member at a budget meeting, Callan began. But it seems they've decided to play hardball. New rules have been shoved down our throats, tighter than a vacuum-sealed tin of space rations. A chorus of groans and grumbles rippled through the crowd, like a symphony of disgruntled aliens. The bulbous creature's eyes blinked in a confused sequence, a Morse code of disapproval. Rules are just suggestions, right? Bev chimed in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Like the speed of light, more of a guideline than a rule, Callan chuckled, a sound that was part amusement and part resignation. In an ideal universe, sure. But we're stuck in this one, where the council's decided to squeeze the life out of creative thought like a python on a sunbathing tourist. Mosca's colors flickered with interest. What's the plan, Callan? More rule bending. Callan's grin was as mischievous as a gremlin with a set of wrenches. Exactly. We're going to dodge, weave, and pirouette around these new regulations. Make them look like a bad joke in a good comedy. The students leaned in, eager for the next lesson in this guerrilla warfare against bureaucratic oppression. Callan outlined the strategy for the day, a series of exercises designed to exploit every loophole, every ambiguous clause the council had overlooked in their arrogance. The session kicked off with the usual chaos, arms, legs, and tentacles flailing in every direction, the noise reaching a crescendo that would make a rock concert sound like a meditation retreat. Callan moved among the chaos, offering advice that was equal parts sage wisdom and reckless abandon. Remember, out of bounds is just a state of mind. He shouted over the din, as one of the aliens vaulted over an invisible line that was supposed to limit their play area. The council drones hovered above, their cameras capturing every infraction with the joylessness of a robot assigned to inspect paint drying. Callan could almost hear the mechanical grumbling as they recorded evidence for whatever kangaroo court the council had lined up. Bev, with her usual flair for theatrics, led her team in a maneuver that could generously be described as interpretive dance meets riot control. They spun and twisted, a kaleidoscope of movement that defied both gravity and decorum. Mosca countered with a more subtle approach, using deception and feints that would make a con artist green with envy. By the end of the session, the teams were neck and neck, each having mastered the art of making the rulebook look more like a set of suggestions from a distant relative you never liked. Callan called them together, the sound of heavy breathing and the odd click from Mosca's vocal apparatus filling the air. Well done, you've managed to turn a game into a protest movement. The council would be proud if they didn't have the collective imagination of a bag of rocks. They should be thanking us for the free entertainment, Mosca said, their voice a series of musical clicks and hums. Callan leaned against the holo display, the cool surface a welcome relief against the heat of exertion. Remember, the tournament is just the beginning. We're here to show them that thinking outside the box isn't just a metaphor, it's a way of life. The students began to disperse, chatting among themselves, their spirits high despite the looming specter of council retribution. Callan watched them go, a mix of pride and concern gnawing at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Elda's holographic form flickered into view beside him, her expression as unreadable as a poker player with a mask. "The council's tightening their grip," she said, her voice a monotone that could put a sleep aid to shame. "Yeah, I noticed. Can't swing a cat around here without hitting a rule these days." Callan crossed his arms, his posture one of defiance. "But they can tighten all they want. We'll just slip through their fingers like greasy noodles." Elda's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "You're playing a dangerous game, Callan. It's the only game worth playing," he replied, his eyes fixed on the retreating forms of the students. "If we don't push back now, they'll have us singing their tune for the rest of our lives." Elda considered his words, her form flickering as if in deep thought. "I'll relay your creativity to the council. Oh, please do. Tell them I'm glad they're watching. Maybe they'll learn something about how to actually engage a brain cell." With that, Elda vanished, leaving Callan alone with his thoughts and the slowly dissipating energy of the sports hall. He knew the risks. Hell, he practically bathed in them daily. But what was the alternative? Sit back and let the council turn the academy into a factory for mindless drones? No, he'd rather face a firing squad of disapproving bureaucrats than let that happen. As the day of the tournament loomed closer, the halls of the academy buzzed with a frenetic energy. The students were sharpening their skills, honing their techniques, each move a testament to Callan's unorthodox teachings. Word had spread, as words do in a place this small, that Callan's methods were more than just rebellious, they were effective. The council, in its infinite wisdom, responded with more rules. Restrictions piled on top of restrictions, like a bureaucracy-themed game of Jenga. One wrong move and the whole thing would come crashing down, much to Callan's delight. He gathered the students once more, their faces a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The tournament was their chance to shine, or crash and burn in a blaze of glory. Either way, it was going to be spectacular. "All right, team," Callan began, his voice carrying the gravitas of a general addressing his troops before a battle. The councils laid out the rulebook, thicker than a politician's wallet. "But we know better, don't we?" A murmur of agreement swept through the group. Bev shot him a grin, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You mean we've got to play by their rules, but not really?" "Exactly," Callan said, his grin matching hers. "They think they can control the chaos, but chaos doesn't like being told what to do. And neither do we." Mosca's colors shifted, a vibrant display of defiance. "We'll show them, Callan. We'll show them what it means to really play." As the day of the tournament arrived, the atmosphere was electric. The sports hall had been transformed into an arena, the usual metallic drabness replaced with banners and holo displays celebrating the spirit of intergalactic cooperation, or as Callan saw it, a very expensive exercise in public relations. The students lined up, their expressions a cocktail of nerves and excitement. Callan moved among them, offering last-minute advice that was half inspiration, half challenge. "Remember, they're not just opponents," he told Bev. "They're opportunities to show how much smarter we are." Bev laughed, adjusting her gear with the ease of someone who'd seen their fair share of scrapes. "And if we lose, then we lose famously," Callan replied. "I always say if you're going to fail, do it in style." The tournament kicked off, and the games unfolded with all the subtlety of a bar brawl in a zero-gravity dance club. Bev's team led with a frontal assault, their tactics as bold as a daredevil on a tightrope. Mosca's team, true to form, employed cunning and subterfuge, their moves a symphony of calculated chaos. The council drones were out in force, their presence a constant reminder of the watchful eye of authority. Callan noted them with a smirk, imagining the council watching the footage with the enthusiasm of a funeral director at a birthday party. As the games progressed, It became clear that Callan's teachings had taken root. The students were not just playing, they were orchestrating a masterclass in creative rule interpretation. Techniques like bend it, like bureaucracy and dodge, the bureaucracy became more than just clever plays. They were acts of defiance. The final game saw Bev and Mosca's teams facing off, a clash of strategies that promised to be as epic as it was unpredictable. The crowd, composed of students, instructors, and the occasional council member pretending to be interested, held its breath. Bev led with a feint so convincing, even Callan had to double-check to make sure he hadn't missed a memo. Mosca countered with a move that defied both gravity and logic, leaving spectators scratching their heads and the drones buzzing with confusion. In the end, it was a draw, but it was the kind of draw that left everyone talking. The students had done more than just play a game. They had made a statement. They had shown that rules, while important, were not the end-all, be-all of existence. The tournament concluded with a closing ceremony that was more formality than celebration. Callan watched as the students basked in their achievements, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of a job well done. As the crowd dispersed, he caught sight of the council members gathered in a corner, their expressions a mixture of confusion and begrudging respect. Callan knew they would spend countless hours dissecting every play, every move, trying to find a way to regain control. But for now, the victory was his and the students. They had learned to think for themselves, to challenge the status quo, and that was a win no amount of bureaucratic meddling could take away. Elda appeared beside him, her holographic form flickering like a ghost with commitment issues. "Congratulations, Callan. I believe you've made your point." Callan grinned, the kind of grin that said he had more tricks up his sleeve. "Yeah, but don't worry. I've got plenty more where that came from. The council can keep their rules, we'll just keep bending them." As Elda vanished, Callan looked around the emptying arena. The tournament was over, but the real game, the one against stagnation and complacency, was just beginning, and Callan Verity was more than ready to keep playing. The Academy's buzzing atmosphere fizzled out like a cheap firecracker on a wet day. The students had barely caught their breath from the tournament when the hammer dropped, or more accurately, the council's memo did. It was stuck to the bulletin board like a death sentence in bureaucratic terms, all official and dripping with the kind of gravitas usually reserved for declarations of war or lunch menus in posh restaurants. Callan stood before the notice, a sigh or taste in his mouth that had nothing to do with the recycled air. Elda flickered into view beside him, her expression doing its best impression of a passive-aggressive scowl. "They've really outdone themselves this time," she said, her holographic eyes scanning the document like a cyborg accountant. "Well, I'll give them this. They sure know how to kill a party." Callan's voice was loaded with the kind of sarcasm that could peel paint off a spaceship hull. "What's on the agenda? Exile to a penal colony? Or are they just gonna bore us all to death with a lecture on rule following? They're threatening expulsion," Callan, Elda replied, her tone as flat as a pancake on a diet. "Effective immediately if you don't rein in your little band of rebels." Callan gave a low whistle. "Impressive. Didn't think they'd go nuclear this quickly. Overachievers, aren't they? This isn't a joke," Elda pressed, her form flickering with a hint of urgency. "The council's serious. They've called an emergency meeting to decide your fate, and the fate of the students involved. Great. I love a good nail-biter." Callan turned to face her, arms crossed defiantly. "So what's the plan? Do I grovel, promise to be a good boy, and hope they let us off with a slap on the wrist? That might be a start," Elda suggested, though her holographic glitch betrayed a flicker of doubt. "But you need to decide fast. The students are counting on you." He knew she was right. The students were out there, buzzing with anxiety, their earlier triumphs overshadowed by the looming threat. Callan had always preached about bending the rules, about finding the cracks in the system and widening them, but now those cracks threatened to swallow them whole. Mosca and Bev were among the first to find him, their faces a mix of defiance and dread. "So what now?" Bev asked, arms crossed, her usual bravado tempered by uncertainty. Callan shrugged, trying to project an air of confidence he didn't quite feel. Well, we could always try begging. I hear it's a time-honored tradition when facing imminent doom. Mosca's appendages twitched with agitation. Begging's not really our style, is it? Not usually, no, Callan admitted. But desperate times call for desperate measures, or at least a really good distraction, Bev snorted. And here I thought the council loved a good show. Guess they've finally realized they're not the stars, exactly. So, let's give them a performance they won't forget, Callan said, a sly grin forming. But first, let's figure out how not to get vaporized in the process. The students gathered, their numbers a testament to Callan's influence, for better or worse. They looked to him for guidance, hope, or maybe just a hint that this wouldn't end as badly as it seemed. All right, listen up, Callan called out, his voice slicing through the murmur of apprehension. The council's throwing down the gauntlet. They want us to behave, to fit in their neat little boxes. But that's not us, is it? No, came the collective shout. It was a small victory hearing their defiance, but the shadow of expulsion loomed large. So here's the deal. We need to show them that we're not just a bunch of rule-breaking hooligans. We're innovators, thinkers, and maybe a little bit rebellious, but in a good way. Mosca's colors shifted in agreement. And if they don't buy it, then we've got to make them see the bigger picture, Callan said. This isn't just about a few games. It's about changing the way things are done. About making this place better, not just for us, but for every student who comes after. Elda materialized again, the urgency in her voice cranked up to 11. Callan, I've intercepted a transmission. The council's meeting is starting. They're expecting a proposal for how you intend to rectify this situation. Callan rubbed his chin, buying time with faux contemplation. A proposal, huh? I suppose we'll try harder not to get caught isn't going to cut it, not unless you're aiming for comedic effect, Elder replied dryly. Okay. We'll give them our version of a peace offering. A show of good faith that doesn't make me want to vomit. Bev leaned in. Are we talking about the same council that thinks fun is a dirty word? Yep. So, let's make sure we use small words and lots of colorful graphs. With that, Callan and his ragtag group of misfits set about crafting their pitch. It was a mad scramble of ideas and half-formed plans, a brainstorming session that felt more like a conspiracy meeting, but they had no choice. This was their last shot, and Callan intended to make it count. As they pieced together their presentation, Callan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His little rebellion had sparked something, but now it threatened to burn out before it could truly catch fire. Callan, Elda's voice cut through his thoughts, they're ready for you. He nodded, more to himself than anyone else. It was showtime. He straightened his jacket, the fabric worn and comfortable, much like his resolve. He could do this. He had to do this. The council's chamber was as sterile and lifeless as ever, a monument to dullness with its gray walls and overabundance of potted plants. The council members sat in a semicircle, their faces a blend of skepticism and boredom. Callan half expected them to start snoring halfway through his presentation. Without missing a beat, Callan launched into his pitch. Ladies, gentlemen, and whatever you are, he began, nodding to a particularly bulbous council member with more eyes than a peacock with a mutant gene. We've had ourselves a bit of a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. One of them intoned, his voice the auditory equivalent of watching paint dry. You've been inciting rebellion. Callan spread his hands in a gesture of innocence that fooled absolutely no one. Rebellion. No, you misunderstand. We're engaging in creative expression. You know, fostering innovation, developing strategic thinking, all the buzzwords you love so much. The bulbous member blinked several of its eyes at once. And how do you propose to control these expressions? Callan flashed what he hoped was a winning smile. Well, we've come up with a plan. A mentorship program of sorts. Training sessions designed to channel this energy into something productive. A mentorship program. Another member asked skeptically. Sounds like more of the same under a different name. Not quite. We're talking about structured activities guided by experienced instructors. You can even monitor them with your drones, just to be sure we're not plotting an insurrection." The council murmured among themselves, the sound like a hive of bees debating the merits of honey versus wasps. Callan could feel their resistance, their need to maintain control clashing with the potential to claim credit for an innovative program. "Very well," one said finally, "we'll consider your proposal. But understand this, any further infractions and your students will face consequences. Severe ones." Callan nodded. "Understood. We'll play by the rules as much as we can anyway." With that, the meeting adjourned and Callan left the chamber with the sensation of having narrowly dodged a cosmic bullet. He rejoined Elda, who was waiting with bated breath just outside. "Well?" she asked, her form flickering with anticipation. Callan shrugged. "We bought some time. Don't know how long, but it's something. Now we've got to make good on our promise, or at least look like we're trying." The return to the students brought a wash of relief over him, their eager faces a reminder of why he'd started this in the first place. They were the future, the change he wanted to see. And by some miracle, they still believed in him. "Okay, team," he said, gathering them around. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got a reprieve. Now we just need to convince them we're model citizens, all while sticking it to the man." Bev grinned, her confidence returning. "So, lie through our teeth and dazzle them with misdirection. Sounds like a plan." "Exactly," Callan chuckled. "And who knows? Maybe we'll even learn something along the way." The group dispersed, the weight of impending doom momentarily lifted. Callan watched them go, a sense of determination settling over him. This was only the beginning, and though the road ahead was fraught with danger, he wouldn't trade it for the world. Elda appeared beside him, her presence a comforting constant in the chaos. "You did well, Callan." "Better than they expected. Not just me," he corrected. "We're all in this together, and with a bit of luck we might just pull it off." As the students continued their preparations, Callan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The council might tighten its grip, but he was prepared to slip through their fingers at every turn. Because in the end, rules were made to be bent, and Callan Verity was more than happy to be the one doing the bending. The future beckoned, uncertain and exhilarating, and Callan was ready to meet it head-on. Come what may, he was determined to make a difference, to leave a lasting mark on this academy and the young minds within it. And maybe, just maybe, he'd even have a little fun along the way. "Ready for round two?" Elda asked, her holographic brow raised in challenge. Callan grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Oh, I'm always ready." The Intergalactic Sports Academy's space hall buzzed like a hive of bees on caffeine. Callan Verity stood at the front, looking like the universe's most disgruntled babysitter. His motley crew of students stared back at him, a kaleidoscope of alien colors and human defiance, waiting for him to pull a rabbit out of his metaphorical hat, or, in this case, a plan out of his ass. Callan leaned against the holo display, which flickered with jagged lines that seemed to share his skepticism. "All right, folks, listen up. We've got a tournament to win, and the council breathing down our necks like a pack of particularly nasty hellhounds. We need a plan that screams we're respectable, without actually being, respectable." Mosca's appendages twitched with what Callan had come to recognize as excitement or indigestion. Hard to tell with aliens sometimes. "Are we going to bend the rules again, Callan?" "Of course," Callan replied. "Rules are like cheap underwear, supportive but restrictive. Our job is to stretch them just the right amount without tearing the whole thing apart." Bev, ever the sarcastic oracle of the group, smirked. "So, basically, we're doing what we always do, just with more style and less chance of getting vaporized." "Exactly," Callan said, pointing at her like a teacher who actually liked his students. "And since the council has the collective imagination of a brick, we're going to give them a show they can't ignore." Elda's holographic form appeared, her expression a mix of bemusement and impatience. "Callan, if you're done flirting with disaster, perhaps you should explain how we're not going to end up expelled. Or worse, Right down to brass tacks, Callan said, clapping his hands together, the universal sign for I have your attention, now let me hold it hostage. We're going to use what humans have been using for centuries to win at sports. Cheating. No, history. A murmur rippled through the students, and the alien with too many eyes, let's call him Blinky, blinked in confusion. History. How does that help us? Simple, Callan said with the confidence of a man who knew how to bluff. Humans have a rich tradition of bending sports rules without breaking them. We'll use strategies from history to outthink, outmaneuver, and outplay our opponents. Mosca's colors shifted in what Callan hoped was agreement, though it could just as easily have been disbelief. Like what? Like the Trojan horse, Callan said, enjoying the perplexed looks that greeted this historical tidbit. We'll give them something they think they understand, something predictable, then hit them with the unexpected. Bev crossed her arms, her skepticism as thick as the recycled air. And how does that work without actual horses? Or an actual wooden thing? Think metaphorically, Bev, Callan said, gesturing around the sports hall. We'll present a team that plays by the rules, but our real strength lies in what they can't see, our adaptability, our cunning, our utter refusal to be boring. The alien student, a vibrant mix of colors and appendages, raised a tentacle. And what about the drones? Callan grinned. Ah, the drones. The council's eyes and ears. We'll give them a spectacle, distract them. And while they're busy watching the show, we'll play our real game. Elda's holographic eyes glinted with what might have been approval. You're gambling with the future of these students, Callan. Hey, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space, Callan shot back with a wink. Besides, I've got it on good authority that future historians love a good underdog story. Bev snorted. You mean the kind where we win, right? More or less, Callan admitted with a casual shrug. If we don't win, the history books won't matter much, will they? With the plan loosely in place, the students started to divide into groups, discussing strategy and tactics with an enthusiasm that was either inspiring or terrifying, depending on your point of view. Mosca sidled up, her appendages twitching in a way that suggested both curiosity and a mild case of space lice. And if the council realizes what we're up to, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Callan replied. Or burn it, whichever seems more fun at the time. The preparation was chaos wrapped in confusion, served with a side of hope. As the students practiced their moves, Callan couldn't help but feel a spark of optimism. Maybe they stood a chance. Maybe they could pull this off without being reduced to stardust. Callan, a word. Elda's voice cut through the din, her holographic form hovering beside him like a conscience with an attitude problem. He turned to her, raising an eyebrow. What's up, Elda? I've been monitoring the council's channels, she said, her voice laced with digital static. They're not convinced. They're watching us, waiting for us to slip up. Callan sighed, glancing at the surveillance drones buzzing overhead like mechanical gnats. Typical. You'd think they'd have better things to do. It's their job to make sure you stick to the rules, Elda pointed out, her tone as dry as a Martian summer. Yeah, well, rules are like suggestions, right? Callan replied with a grin. And we're pretty good at creative suggestions. Elda's expression wavered between exasperation and amusement. Just remember, Callan, the council's not as stupid as they look. Good thing neither am I, he said, turning his attention back to the students. All right, team, let's take this energy and channel it into something they can't ignore. The students responded with cheers and whoops, their enthusiasm infectious. For now they had a plan, and that was more than they'd had yesterday, or most days, frankly. As they practiced, Callan couldn't help but think about the upcoming tournament. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been. It wasn't just about winning a game, it was about proving a point. Proving that they could play by the rules while still being themselves. Callan, Mosca's voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. Yeah, Mosca, she hesitated, her colors swirling in a way that suggested uncertainty. Do you think we can really do this? Change things? Callan paused, considering his answer. It was a big question for a big problem, and he didn't want to give false hope. But he also didn't want to dash the spark of rebellion he'd spent so long cultivating. Honestly, Mosca, "I don't know," he said finally. "But I do know that if we don't try, nothing will ever change. And I'd rather go down swinging than sit back and watch." Mosca's colors shifted, the tension easing. Yeah, I get that." "Good," Callan said, clapping her on the back, careful not to dislodge any of her appendages. "Now let's make history, even if it's just a footnote." The hours flew by in a blur of drills, strategies, and the occasional bout of panic. As the tournament approached, the students' resolve only strengthened. They weren't just a ragtag bunch of rule breakers anymore. They were a team, unified by their defiance and a shared dream of proving themselves. Elda kept her holographic eyes on the drones, her reports of the Council's surveillance growing increasingly irritated. "They've doubled the number of drones, Callan." "They're nervous." "Good," Callan replied, his grin as sharp as a laser. "Let them be nervous. We're the ones with everything to gain." The day of the tournament dawned with the same recycled air and artificial light as any other in Asterope, but to Callan and his students it felt different. It felt like the start of something new. As the students assembled, their uniforms a patchwork of colors and styles, because who said you couldn't fight the system in style? Callan took a moment to appreciate them. This was what he'd been fighting for, not just for himself but for them, for the chance to be more than the sum of their parts. "All right, team," he called out, rallying them one last time. "Today, we show the Council what we're made of. We play by the rules, but we play our way. We bend, but we don't break. We adapt, we improvise, and most importantly, we have fun doing it." Bev raised her hand. "Even if it pisses them off." "Especially if it pisses them off," Callan confirmed, earning a ripple of laughter. "So let's get out there and remind them why they should never underestimate us." The students filed out, their spirits high, their determination palpable. Callan watched them go, feeling a surge of pride. Whatever happened next, they were ready, and so was he. Elda appeared beside him, her holographic expression softer now. "Nice speech, Callan." "Thanks," he said, adjusting his jacket. "Now let's see if we can back it up." The tournament was about to begin, and the air crackled with anticipation. This was their moment, their chance to show the universe, or at least the drab council, that rules weren't the only way to win. Callan grinned, the challenge ahead nothing compared to the thrill of the fight. The future was uncertain, but that was half the fun. And if there was one thing Callan Verity knew, it was that sometimes the best stories came from the most uncertain beginnings. "Game on," he muttered to himself, stepping forward into the arena of possibility, ready to bend every rule in the book. The day of the tournament started with all the optimism of a condemned man eating his last meal. Callan Verity stood in the locker room, watching as his ragtag team of misfits geared up, their enthusiasm bouncing off the walls like a hyperactive rubber ball. He couldn't decide if he was more proud or terrified. "All right, everyone," Callan said, clapping his hands to get their attention. "Remember what we talked about. Trojan horse, historical strategy, all that jazz. We're here to play smart, not hard. And if you've got any witty one-liners in the tank, now's the time to use them." Bev, already adjusting her helmet to fit her unruly hair, waved a hand. "So, our game plan is basically to be sneaky bastards." "In a word, yes," Callan replied, his grin as sarcastic as ever. "But let's call it strategic genius, shall we?" Mosca's excitement was palpable, or maybe it was just his indigestion acting up. His appendages twitched in a way that suggested readiness. "I've been practicing my surprise move." "Good," Callan said. "The element of surprise is our best weapon, right after our charm, of course." Outside, the sports hall was a cauldron of noise and anticipation. The dome ceiling projectors had outdone themselves, painting an artificial sky that tried its best to look authentic. Callan wondered if anyone else noticed the odd flicker that occasionally turned the sky a vivid shade of vomit. Elda's holographic form popped into existence beside him, her expression as unreadable as a poker-faced robot. "The council's buzzing with nerves," she reported. "They're expecting you to muck things up." "Which is exactly why we're not going to give them the satisfaction," Callan said. "We'll play by their rules." Mostly, the team filed out onto the court where their opponents, a team of green-skinned aliens who looked like they could bench press a small moon, were already waiting. Callan watched as the council's surveillance drones hovered like electronic vultures, ready to feast on their failures. "Here's the deal, folks," Callan said, addressing his team one last time. "We play our game, we adapt. We dodge, we weave, and we remember that rules are more like guidelines." The match began with all the subtlety of a comet crashing into a moon. The alien team charged forward, muscles and tentacles flailing with the grace of a battle-hardened ballet company. Callan's team, however, had something better than brute force: guile. "Remember, Trojan horse," Callan yelled from the sidelines, his voice just audible over the chaos. "Give them something they think they understand." Bev took point, engaging the aliens with a maneuver that looked suspiciously like a dance move gone wrong. The aliens blinked in confusion, momentarily thrown off by the sheer audacity of what could only be described as interpretative sports. Meanwhile, Mosca executed his surprise move, a combination of feints and flails that might have looked ridiculous if it wasn't so effective. The aliens, expecting something more conventional, faltered, leaving just enough of an opening for Bev to slip through their defense. "That's it," Callan shouted, adrenaline pumping. "Confuse them till they don't know what's up or down." As the match progressed, a miracle began to unfold. Other teams, watching from the sidelines, picked up on the unconventional tactics. Inspired, or maybe just curious to see if stupidity was contagious, they started to mimic the strategies. The energy shifted. What had been a straightforward sporting event morphed into a chaotic ballet of unpredictable movements and creative loophole exploitation. The drones struggled to keep up, their programming designed to catch infractions based on traditional playbooks, not circus acts. Elda's voice buzzed through Callan's earpiece, a digital chuckle hidden beneath her words. "The council's losing it, Callan. They don't know how to react." "Good," he replied, savoring the words like a fine vintage of recycled air. "Let them scramble." The alien teams, previously divided by species and strategy, began to unite under a banner of shared rebellion. They saw what Callan's team was doing and decided that sticking it to the council was more fun than following orders. Blinky, the alien with too many eyes, caught Callan's eye from across the court. He tilted his head ever so slightly, as if to say, "Is this what you meant by vaporized?" "Surviving by being unpredictable," Callan nodded, a sly smile spreading across his face. "Vaporized? Nah, that's just what happens when you stop thinking," he muttered under his breath. "This is us being smart." The crowd, initially uncertain, started to cheer. They were witnessing something new, something alive. A rebellion that wasn't just about breaking rules but reshaping them into something new, something that felt like freedom. The council, meanwhile, was in disarray. Their strict enforcement, their rigid adherence to tradition, it was unraveling. They'd been so focused on preventing rule breaking that they'd failed to see the tide of change coming for them like a rogue wave. In a rare moment of unity, the various alien teams clustered together, a colorful mosaic of defiance. They'd stopped being competitors and had become co-conspirators. A new game was being played, one that wasn't on the official schedule. Callan watched, heart pounding, as the students rallied together, their resolve fueling a change that no one had expected. They weren't just playing a game, they were rewriting the rules, fighting not just for victory in sport but victory in spirit. Elda appeared beside him, her holographic projection almost smug. "You've done it, Callan. They're listening to you." "About time someone did," he replied, though he was quiet enough that no one else could hear him. "So what's the council doing now, crying into their rulebooks?" "They are scrambling," Elda said, her synthetic voice tinged with admiration. "They never thought a play could be made like this." Callan shook his head, still amazed at how quickly things had shifted. Rule 1 of life: always expect the unexpected. Rule 2: if you can't expect it, at least make sure it's entertaining. The final whistle blew, marking the end of what had been less of a match and more of a call to arms. The students, breathless but triumphant, crowded together in celebration, their laughter echoing in the hall. The council members, stone-faced and humorless as ever, approached the field with the kind of determination you might expect from someone about to perform a root canal on a bear. Their control had crumbled faster than a cheap spaceship under pressure, and they looked as thrilled as a business meeting that had turned into a dance party. "You realize this is highly irregular," one of the council members said, their voice as cold as a space station freezer. Callan stepped forward, his posture as relaxed as a man who just found out he didn't have to pay his taxes. "Irregular, sure, but effective, right? We played by the rules." "Well, sort of. And we didn't break anything important." The council members exchanged glances, their expressions as unreadable as a bad poker hand. They were caught in a bind, too public to back down, too stubborn to admit defeat. "This cooperation is not how the tournament was intended to proceed," another council member said, their tone dripping with reluctance. Callan shrugged, a smirk playing at his lips. "You wanted intergalactic cooperation, didn't you? Unity through sports. I'd say we nailed that." The council begrudgingly had to admit he had a point. The students had proven that sometimes bending the rules created something far more resilient than simply following them. It created a community. As the crowd began to disperse, a new energy buzzed in the recycled air. The students, once divided by their differences, now stood united by a common cause. They weren't just a bunch of aliens trying to fit into a human world. They were a team, a family. Elda, as always, hovered nearby, her expression softer. "You did it, Callan. You changed things." "For now," Callan said, watching as the students celebrated. "But who knows? Maybe history will remember this as the day we stopped playing by someone else's rules and started writing our own." The victory was bittersweet, as all victories in this kind of story tend to be. The council would regroup, recalibrate, and probably find new ways to tighten their grip. But for today, they'd been outplayed by their own game. As the students left the court, their laughter echoing through the corridors, Callan felt a surge of optimism. It was a rare feeling, like finding a wallet with cash still in it. "Back to the drawing board tomorrow?" Bev asked, sidling up beside him. "Probably," Callan replied, already thinking about the next hurdle. "But today we celebrate." Mosca, his colors a swirl of triumph, chimed in. "We didn't just bend it like bureaucracy, we bent it like we owned it." "That we did," Callan agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility lift, if only for a moment. The fight wasn't over, but today had proven one thing. Underestimating the power of a little ingenuity and a lot of stubbornness might be the biggest mistake the council ever made. As the last of the students filed out, Callan took a deep breath of the ever-stale air, the tang of victory still fresh. The future was uncertain, sure, but that was half the fun. And if there was one thing Callan Verity knew, it was that sometimes the best stories came from the most uncertain beginnings. "Game on," he muttered again, stepping forward into this new world they'd begun to shape. The tournament's aftermath was like watching the remnants of a meteor shower. Everyone was dazed, burnt out, but oddly thrilled at having witnessed it. Asterope, the subterranean city that wore the air of a grumpy elder who'd seen too much, was suddenly abuzz with a new kind of energy. It was like someone had slipped some excitement into the recycled air, and now everyone was breathing it in. Callan Verity, staring out from the sports hall, could feel the atmosphere shift. The air might still taste like it had been through one too many filters, but at least it didn't smell of stagnation. He leaned back against the cold metal wall, reflecting on how just one day had managed to shake up a place that had been as unyielding as a council member's expression in the presence of fun. Who knew rebellion could be so invigorating? Mosca said, his appendages twitching like a caffeinated octopus. He'd sidled up next to Callan, eyes darting around in disbelief at the changes rippling through the academy. "Yeah, well, nothing like a good old-fashioned rule-bending to get the blood pumping," Callan replied, a grin splitting his face. He watched as the students, aliens of every hue and configuration, mingled in ways they hadn't dared before. Elda, shimmering into view beside him, looked almost smug, which was impressive for a hologram. "So, what's next for our fearless leader?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Fearless? Hardly. I just know when to duck and weave. Anyway, I guess I'll be heading back to Earth soon," Callan said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Can't stick around forever. Got a planet to call home, taxes to dodge. Leaving already." Bev had joined them, helmet under one arm, her unruly hair doing its best impression of a wild animal. "Didn't peg you for the homesick type. Not homesick, just sick of home," Callan quipped. "But yeah, I'm thinking it's time to let you lot handle things here. You've got this, right?" Mosca snorted, a sound like a wet balloon deflating. "After today, we could probably handle a supernova." The council, predictably, was having a collective meltdown that could be seen from light years away. Callan wasn't too concerned. They'd regroup, of course. Bureaucracies were like cockroaches, annoyingly resilient. But they'd have to adapt now, whether they liked it or not. The students had their taste of freedom, and it was a flavor they weren't likely to forget. It was the kind of rebellion that stuck like gum to a shoe. The council might try to tighten their grip, but the students had slipped through like sand. "You really think they'll let us keep this up?" Bev asked, skepticism lacing her words. "Probably not," Callan admitted. "But that's half the fun, isn't it? Finding new ways to make them sweat." "Callan Verity, the gift that keeps on giving," Mosca said with a theatrical sigh. Elda chuckled, a sound that was more a series of electronic beeps than laughter, but somehow managed to convey amusement. "Think they'll write songs about you?" Callan pretended to ponder. "Maybe a limerick or two, hopefully nothing too flattering. I wouldn't want them to get the wrong idea." The academy was changing, that much was clear. The sports hall, usually echoing with the sounds of drills and play, now hummed with discussions. Ideas flew as freely as the drones once had, creating a tapestry of shared knowledge and creativity. It was like witnessing the birth of a new society, a slightly dysfunctional one, but when had that ever stopped anyone? Callan found himself wandering through the corridors, past classrooms where students were no longer confined by rigid lesson plans. Alien languages intertwined, cultures blended, and for a moment it all felt possible. Maybe not utopia, but something close enough for government work. He stumbled across a group of students, deep in conversation. One of them was the alien student, a riot of colors and appendages, who'd gotten curious about the term vaporized. They were animatedly discussing strategy, gesturing wildly with their various limbs. "Hey, Callan," the student called out, multiple eyes fixing on him. "Is this what you meant by vaporized? Making something new out of chaos?" Callan chuckled, shaking his head. "Vaporized is what happens when you stop thinking and start following blindly. What you're doing here. This is the opposite. This is thinking on your feet, or whatever you've got down there." The student nodded, eyes gleaming with understanding. "We'll make it work." As Callan continued his stroll, he couldn't help but feel a bit like a proud parent watching their kids finally figure out how to ride a bike without training wheels. Except in this case, the bike was intergalactic politics, and the training wheels were draconian rules. Elda appeared beside him again, more solid than a hologram should be, her presence a constant companion. "You're really leaving?" "Well, I've overstayed my welcome, haven't I?" Callan replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Besides, it's not like I won't be back. Someone's got to keep you lot on your toes." "Asterope will be different without you," she said, her tone genuinely affectionate. "Different isn't always bad," Callan said, trying and failing to sound indifferent. "Besides, you've got these guys. They'll keep the fire burning." He stopped outside the entrance to the academy, looking back at the place he'd somehow managed to turn on its head. The air was still the same mixture of stale and metallic, but it carried with it the scent of change. It was a good smell, a hopeful one. Bev and Mosca joined him at the threshold, standing together like a mismatched team of vigilantes about to save the day, or just cause a bit of chaos, probably the latter. "So this is it?" Bev asked, her tone carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "Yeah, this is it," Callan said, more to himself than anyone else. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll hear rumors of my exploits. They tend to precede me. Mosca shot him a look. Who knows, maybe you'll come back and find us running this place. I'd like to see that, Callan said, and he meant it. Just don't forget to keep bending those rules. As he made his way to the tram that would take him to the port, a rickety contraption that felt held together by sheer willpower and duct tape, he felt a pang of something bittersweet. Leaving was never easy, even when it was necessary. But he'd done his part. Now it was up to them. The tram ride was as bumpy as his tenure had been, jostling him around like a pinball. He watched the cityscape blur past, thinking about the students he'd leave behind. They were smart, resourceful, and well on their way to shaping their futures, if not the world's. As he stepped off the tram at the port, the place was bustling with travelers and traders, people coming and going like the universe's most chaotic parade. The bureaucrats in their neatly pressed uniforms glanced at him, recognizing a troublemaker when they saw one, but Callan just grinned. He'd missed that look. Boarding the ship that would take him back to Earth, he couldn't shake the feeling of leaving something important behind. But he knew it was in good hands, hands that were many, varied, and surprisingly competent. The ship doors closed with a hiss, and Callan settled into his seat, the hum of the engines a comforting backdrop. As the ship launched into the vastness of space, he felt a sense of closure mixed with expectation. He'd started something on Asterope, but who knew where it would end? For now, though, he'd focus on the journey ahead. One thing was certain, he'd left a legacy of change, however unintentional, and that was something worth leaving behind. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Callan thought about the academy, the students, and the rebellion they'd sparked. He felt grateful, content, and yes, a little smug. But mostly, he felt ready for whatever came next. Because if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that rules were optional, creativity was key, and a little chaos never hurt anyone. To new beginnings, he muttered, raising an imaginary glass to the void. And to bending the universe to our will. And with that, he let the future come, knowing he'd face it with the same irreverence that had gotten him this far. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning the game. It was about changing the rules entirely.